today I'm going to talk about skills. This is one of my favorite graphic novels, turned into a great HBO show called The Watchmen, and it's all about these superheroes, with the exception of one of them. All of them just have skills. They don't actually have any superpowers, and so they're like actually just real people trying to stop crime, at least most of them, with skills that they built up. And so I think of that as one of the key roles early in your career before you're a faculty member. If you're thinking about graduate school, it seems like a long time when you start, 5 or 6 years, for some people a bit longer. I recommend trying to get through it as quickly as you can. So I got through in 5 years, and part of the way I did that was just the very, very first week or two I arrived. I looked at all the requirements and put it on my calendar and tried to like hit each one for my first year paper, second year paper, third year paper, proposal, dissertation. And even my advisor wanted me to stick around for 6 years, but I pushed through and convinced her to let me defend, in part because I already applied for postdoc funding and got it. And so I recommend trying to get through as quickly as you can in 5 or 6 years. If it's going to take you more time to get the CV that you need to be competitive for the type of job you want, then I recommend doing a postdoc for a couple of years. First of all, postdocs pay much more. They tend to give you much more autonomy. They add to your social network. You can build prestige. You can get another reference letter or two. So there's all these advantages of doing a postdoc, which I highly recommend, rather than just dragging out your time in graduate school. The metaphor I like to use for kind of this early phase of your career, I would say this is grad school, but also probably your postdoc, is don't treat it like a sprint. It's pretty long time. And so I treat it more like speed walking. If you've ever watched speed walkers, they're going like really, really fast, but it looks kind of funny because they aren't allowed to like have, I think that the rules, you have to have 1 foot on the ground at all times. And so they're just like walking like this, and it's for many, many miles. And I tend to think that that's probably a better approach to this early phase of your career, where you have to maintain probably a pretty good clip, but you don't want to burn yourself out and then you can't do anything or you don't enjoy it anymore. So find like a good clip that you can sustain and try to keep at that clip is what I recommend. And keep this kind of these goals, your life goals, your program requirements, the timeline of the job market that you're planning to apply into. Keep all those things kind of like a plan if you can, so you can stick to them and kind of hit these benchmarks for when you want to accomplish things. Of course, reality happens and things come up and it doesn't always go as you plan, but you'll be much more likely to have this kind of go on your terms if you at least know the deadlines and you're hitting them. I will say this, most PhD advisors certainly, and probably postdoc advisors too, are not aware of your plan per se, unless you've told them. They may not even be aware of the program requirements that you're in and the deadlines that you have. So it's really incumbent on you to know what those are. It's your life, it's your goal. They already have their PhD, for example, to try to push through and make sure that you can keep this on track. I realize it's not always completely in your control, but a big chunk of it is. And so the way I was always described, in terms of thinking about time in grad school, is that it was finite. It's not probably a long time, but it's actually pretty limited. And my advisor always would reinforce to me that if you really do outstanding work in grad school, you set yourself up for life. And you remember one of the last metaphors I gave in the last section was about the marshmallow task. There is like this delayed gratification, but if you really focus and you do well, you leave with a PhD, that's going to open up doors to you for the rest of your life. If you're lucky enough to publish in good papers, you can potentially be competitive for the types of jobs that will set you up for the rest of your life. So think of time as this limited resource, that it's pretty scarce. It's one of the most important things that you have, and especially early in your career. I like to get people to think of how many hours they put in each week. And I don't tell people how many hours to work, but I want you to think about how many productive hours you have each week. It might be 40, it might be 50, it might be 60. And then think of how you're going to use that time as best as you can. So for example, if you do, let's do, I would do it on the board, but actually I'm going to do it on the board. Maybe people can see. Okay, so let's do, someone give me how many hours you put in each week to work. All work. 40? Okay, so let's say you have 40 hours a week. How much of that time is spent in classes? are working on classes?
Around 10.
Yeah, so that's now 25% of your time is for your classwork. How much time is spent in meetings or talks or events like this, lab meetings?
In a week,
Yeah,
or in 2.
okay. So that's like events. How many is spent on one-on-one meetings with various people?
For another 2.
Okay. You're lucky, mine's about like 15. Okay. How much is spent doing things like reading?
4 or 5.
Okay. How much is spent on social media? Be honest.
Another 5.
Yeah. For the average person, it's about 3 hours a day, by the way. We call that work, but we all know it's borderline. Okay. And then how many other hours are done for miscellaneous things?
Wait, why are those in the 40 hours? I count those outside of those.
Oh, sorry. I thought this. Okay, so you're not counting it. Some of us, mine is open and I'm at work, social media. Okay, what about other things that are keeping you from your research? What other things take up your time?
Travel.
Travel, is that count in your work hours?
So
Okay, how much on average?
10 hours.
Okay, so travel goes here. Okay, so that leaves you about 5 hours a week for like analysis, research, coding, all those things. Writing. For me, I analyze this. For me, I write about 7 hours a week. So about 30 hours a month. If I'm doing that, I'm very productive. But that means after all my other stuff, I have about 7 hours. Yeah.
Do you write 7 hours, like 1 hour a day, or like 7 hours in 2 days?
I do it like an hour or 2 hours here or there. Like I did like an hour and a half on a plane ride yesterday. Yeah.
Do you count like making graphs, tables, that kind of thing as writing, or is it like the intellectual? Like
Well, it
crafting
can
sentences?
count however you want. I would count like editing tables and stuff like that. For me, that's part of the process. But my point here is simply that once you get busy with things, you have a lot of kind of fixed time costs in your week, attending meetings, events, classes, that you probably only have actually a sliver of time that actually is the type of thing that ends up like counting for you. All this is actually really important, building relationships, learning, thinking, reading. This is all part of it. But the part that really, if you never did this, none of this would show up on your record. And so that's why this part is really important and you have to protect it and sustain it. And so that part of time too, is since it's the most important, is you have to find when is your peak time to do that. Is that like first thing in the morning? Are you really good at those kind of like creative hours at night? Is it really my time that's best? It's probably like from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. is when I get my best work done. And so you really have to think of like, how are you going to manage that critical time? That's like, that time is worth its weight in gold and really protect it. Because if you're going to take on another task that cuts into that time, you're now significantly damaging your options and career prospects. So think really carefully about your core responsibilities that you need to do and when can you be most productive at doing them. You can also look for things like what I look for is synergies. Look for ways to kill 2 birds with 1 stone or 3 birds with 1 stone. So this happens sometimes when I do grad class. A student will write a term paper for my class that also is a proposal for a study that are going to run. Or several students in my class have proposed replications that they have not only run but published. And so now you're killing 2 or 3 birds with 1 stone. And suddenly the time that was spent on classes is now being used also for your research. And so think of ways to do that in your work. The next thing you do is learn to delegate wisely. So this is part of running a great lab, is having graduate students and postdocs and undergrads and master students and a lab manager who you figure out what you can give them for them to kind of run with and be successful with. You don't want to give them things that they can't handle because then they're going to struggle and fail and it's going to fall apart. So you have to learn what you can delegate. For many of that might mean like research assistants. Can you get research assistants and train them and mentor them to help you out with your projects? The other thing is I say always surround yourself with really intelligent and creative people. Don't be threatened by talented people. Embrace talented people and give them space and support. this is like I'm thinking for your undergrad research assistants, give them opportunities to go beyond just running participants, have them develop stimuli, comment on papers, edit references, analyze data if they have some skills. It gives them better training. You can write a better reference for them. They'll actually enjoy the job more, but also can help you. And so that's kind of a win-win type of situation that you ultimately want. Do it well. So you should be really careful of who you take on in your lab. Don't take on too many people. As I said, quality over quantity, a smaller number that you can actually really work with carefully and help them build their skills, or it's going to pay off better for them and for you. Be as efficient as possible with busy work. So I often do like emailing things in my off hours, or when I'm like commuting on a subway or something, I'll respond to like emails if I can, like short ones. Minimize administrative work. So you can do things like, there's a lot of like paperwork. So for example, if you're submitting an ethics proposal or protocol, make it as broad as possible. So it will cover the next 7 studies in that thing. So you don't have to write a new protocol every time you run a new study. Learn to write analysis, learn to analyze using code. I think these things are much more normal now. But if you're doing point and click analyses and SPSS, every time you're redoing it from scratch. Whereas if you have a code and you later learn you just need to remove a participant, or there's a new parameter you forgot to add, or you can combine it with a new data set, then it's often just 1 line of code to do it. Or if you send the paper out for review and reviewers ask you to see if it holds up when you adjust for this confound, that might just be 1 line of code you change rather than spending 2 days rerunning the whole analysis and not sure if it's the exact same one or not. So those things are going to make you far more efficient and save you far more time over the long run. They take more time on the front end, but they save you endless hours. I had an office mate in grad school who was analyzing the IAT, and he was doing it in Excel, where he had like these huge Excel files and like all his data was in rows and columns, and then he'd create little functions in Excel. And then they changed with a paper that changed the IAT scoring algorithm, and he had a paper under review, and they said you have to see if the effects hold to this new scoring algorithm. And it took him like a week of nonstop work to recreate a whole new Excel file, because he had done it in the most like labor-intensive way. And I think he thought in the front end it would save him time. He didn't have to learn to use like SAS or scripting. But in the long run, it took him like probably 10 times as much time. And so he was in like 70 hours a week, but a lot of it was just like wasted time. He could have, saved 10 hours of his time each week if he had just learned to be more efficient. Another big thing is to finish your projects. I think I alluded to this last week. There's this great philosophical question. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, if the study is completed in a lab and no one publishes a paper about it, does it make an impact? Does anybody know about it? Will anybody give you credit for it? And the answer is the same. It's like no. And so you have to take your projects to fruition if you want to get credit for them. And a lot of, I noticed this with some grad students, they'll get like 60, 70, 80, 90% of a project done. They get bored of it or worn down from it. They don't finish it up. It's as if all the work they did counts for nothing, as they may well have just done nothing all that time. So if you have something that's close to the finish line, be really good at finishing. Finishing is like one of the most important skills you can have. So I like this. There's several cartoons I like. This is one I was bad at this early in my career. I was like Robin here. Oh, look, a cool new research idea. And then Batman slaps and says, please finish the papers you've already started. Or there was this, I think this was like this weird philosopher comic. Our project said do next. And this, calcium imaging, modeling, and then someone says, finish your last project. And they throw that guy out the window. Because people don't want to finish their last project. So finish your last project. And then you can start a new one once it's done. Once it's out for review, start a new one, start 2 new ones. But don't start a bunch and then not finish any of them. That's just like a recipe for destroying your career. And I'm not just talking about like academic jobs, I'm talking about finishing your dissertation or your thesis or something. If you're always starting endless projects, you won't have enough for a dissertation. So make sure that you make your finisher, be a closer. And to do this, this is fundamentally a question of priorities. Prioritizing is one of the most important skills you can have in any profession. If you feel like you're too much on the go, your schedule gets too busy, you have too many projects, you don't know how to juggle them, talk to your advisor. This was something my advisor was always good at when he'd always say, we need to do this, we need to do this. And then I'd get overwhelmed and wouldn't know what to prioritize, and I'd sit down with him and prioritize things. And so that's something you should constantly be doing if you're getting too busy, is figure out how to prioritize. What should you do first? And then when you're done with that, you can go to your second or third. Another mistake people often make is they worry about their checklist. They'll do their email because it's easy to get those things done. And then meanwhile, the high priority things they never get to them. So prioritizing is making sure that you're moving on the high things, the high importance, high value things, even if they might not be easy to check off your checklist. So you have to kind of avoid a little bit of this, just checking off your checklist, because otherwise it might take you away from the things that matter. So, you know, and it can be overwhelming when you have too many things. And that's also something that links to like burnout if you feel like you're overwhelmed. So that's why prioritization is also important. It protects your mental health and stops you from being burned out. This was something I posted this in my auto reply. One of the biggest things you can do is manage your email, because your email, at least for me, is my kind of to-do list. And you'll notice when I'm out of the office, I have an auto reply on. And it signals to people that I'm not probably going to be able to get to all the things that got emailed to me, because I can't go to a conference and do that, then come back and do my teaching and meetings and lab meeting and run the social program and all of those things on top of and catch up on all the backlog of emails from people that I don't even know. And so I have things like this and say, you know, I'll be back here if it's important, send your email to me then. If it's someone from my lab, I'll get back to it when I get back to the office. But if it's from strangers asking for things and I don't have the bandwidth to do it, then it will forever fall to the bottom of the pile in priorities. So I was actually chatting with a friend last night. I think managing your email is probably one of the most important professional skills you can have, especially now that so many things are hybrid or virtual. That's how you get in touch with people. It's sometimes hard to track them down in person. So learning how to write a good email that grabs somebody's attention is good. As you move up in authority and power and responsibility, your email is going to overflow. So I get over 100 emails a day. And so managing my email is one of the most important things. I'm constantly trying to get better at it because it is otherwise overwhelming and I won't be able to prioritize things. So I won't be able to get things done if I can't. Yeah, Karen.
Do you have folders or do you label emails or do you just get that?
You want to see what my inbox looks like?
So never know.
But Claire Robertson's in there. That's my inbox. So you can see, like if you look at Tessa's inbox, by the way, away at a conference, I was at a conference, but I can end that, maybe I won't end. But I have 3 people who contacted me that I haven't dealt with already today. But if you look at all these labels I have a due later, a due never, and a due urgently folder. Due urgently is for like papers I'm working on and stuff. I guess I'll be able to click into it. Due never is like for journal tables of contents and things like that. Due later is things that like come to me that I do eventually need to get to, like a review of a paper or something like that, but I might not be able to handle urgently. So it's kind of like at a triage station at a hospital. I triage into all of those 2 things. And then I have all kinds of labels for all kinds of other things, like job, lab stuff, media. And I have many, many other labels. And then as I go through each email, I eventually file it in one of those folders, the label. And if you click on the lab, it has like names of everybody in my lab, and then it links to all their correspondence and projects with them. So that's how I do it. And I try to like always manage my inbox is kind of like the key things or things that are in the due urgently or due later. And so that's how I manage it. But think of how you're going to manage yours and start building a system that's sustainable that you can do over a long period of time, or else you won't be able to get to your priorities. Okay. There's lots of things you can do. There are things like pause inbox. If you're busy, you need some deep work, you can pause your inbox. You can use filters. I have a ton of filters. If people are spamming me, I mute it, I block them. I'm very aggressive at muting and blocking and putting people to my spam folder because I get so much academic spam. By the way, that'll increase your bulbs. I use things like Boomerang if I want to send somebody something. But let's say I'm working in the evening, as a courtesy in my lab, we have a work-life balance policy. So I'll set it so it comes 8 a.m. the next morning or 8 a.m. on Monday. So I'm not emailing them on weekends if I can avoid it. And so, and that means it's kind of at the top of their inbox when they're coming into work too. So your email is more likely to get prioritized if it appears in their inbox at 8 in the morning than if it appears in their inbox at 1 in the morning. Because the probability they wake up and it's buried now behind a bunch of other things is much lower. I have these do later, do never, do urgently fold filters. And some things are tagged always to just automatically get filtered in there. So all the journals I subscribe to with table of contents always just automatically go to the do never folder. And I just pop my eye in there whenever I'm bored, or I have a few minutes. To see kind of what's accumulated. And all that's when I'll scan journal table of contents and stuff. But it doesn't distract me when I'm actually busy with something I need to get to. We have a Slack for lab communications we use that we share things on. A lot of people like that. That helped a lot during the pandemic. Other faculty use tools like SaneBox, or like they have a priority filter in their Google inbox. I tried SaneBox, I found it was pretty redundant with what I already do. But if you don't have a system,
What is SaneBox? Is that for your or?
it's an app for your inbox. It helps prioritize things and filter things, yeah. And I think it figures out what is a priority to you and filters that way for you. Yeah, so certain people might be a priority for you or whatever. Like I said, I also use vacation notifications. That's also for my well-being. So if I don't feel like I have to respond right away this weekend or vacation. But also it helps people because now in my auto reply, if you email me in the last 48 hours, you got an auto reply that told you who to contact about my course, who to contact about my book, who to contact about my lab. It has about 7 things like that. If you want to invite me to talk, here's the thing to fill out. It has all these things, kind of filter people to the right person to help them deal with their issue. There's this great piece of email making professors stupid. It is strangling scholars' ability to think. If you don't manage it well, it will just suffocate you. And as you move up and up and up, your career is going to get worse and worse. So you're going to have to manage it. You also have to manage your meetings. Again, how many meetings did you say you had? 2 hours of meetings a week? So I will have, if you count this one, probably like 6 hours of meetings today. And on Tuesdays, I probably have 6 hours as well. And then throughout the weeks, they're sprinkled in. So I have to do things. So I learned that's one of the reasons I stack my meetings, like for departmental stuff is on Tuesdays, and for lab stuff, it's on Fridays. And that frees up hopefully other times a week for teaching or research. And I learned that shorter meetings are far more efficient. I do half-an-hour meetings, and if we need to book a special meeting for a project, we book it on top. But I've learned that people are more productive and come in more efficient if your meetings are shorter. And you only make it longer when necessary. I do additional meetings, but upon valid request. So I teach a class of 460 people, but I have other undergrads from other labs asking me all the time. I just simply can't, because I can't meet them and do the things for my lab and run the social program and run a giant class. So, but if they have a valid request, like they need me to advise them about something, then I meet them. But for the most part, you have to think of what is worth your time for a meeting. And especially as you move up, you're going to have to figure that out even more and more. It's one of my favorite cartoons of this guy, like someone in finance, looks like who's busy. No Thursdays out. How about never? Is never good for you? Because some meetings are never worth being. Yeah. You'll have to figure out your own. In England, I talked to a lot of students. I think maybe Sandra is an exception in Steve's lab, but the norm there is like meeting their students like once a month or once every 2 months. I prefer once a week. So you have a rhythm, you have a habit of meeting. I do it on a day where we have our lab meeting, and it kind of also encourages everybody to be in that day because everybody's here hopefully for lab meeting, and then they have their one-on-ones with me. So people are on the lab, then you get synergies of people also feeling social support and helping each other troubleshoot stuff. So that's why I do the weekly half hour for my core graduate students, postdoc lab manager. Yeah, but figure out your own thing. I know some people, I used to book it ad hoc whenever people want to meet with me, but we were always constantly booking. We were constantly planning and booking, and it was disruptive, and I found that I couldn't get any writing done. And then they get mad at me because they're meeting me to talk about the project, but then they get mad because their paper sits on my desk for 6 weeks.
Does it feel like it's longer to just like book the meeting? Like emailing?
Yeah. That's why I like also having a set meeting.
Yeah.
Because it saves countless hours booking and coordinating around your schedules. So it's more efficient. And if you stack them, people come in with an agenda, they go through it. And this is something also for the students who I find who take the best use of my meetings come in with an agenda, 3 or 4 bullet items they want to get through, and then we get through all of them. And so they use those meetings super productively. And so it's also at your career stage, you're managing up. You're trying to figure out how to get the feedback you need out of your mentors who have scarce time because of their other commitments. like their own teaching and faculty leadership roles and editing and reviewing and stuff. And so you got to squeeze as much as you can out of your meetings with them. And so if you come in prepared with bullet points and an agenda, you will be able to get through it with a greater likelihood and get that feedback you need. Okay, another thing you need to learn is calendars. So I am a huge fan of Google Calendars. This is what my week in my life looks like. So weekends I have my kids, so I don't really almost do any work. During the week, it's booked up pretty much every week because some things are just set, like teaching prep, lab meeting, one-on-one meetings in my lab, social program meetings, social faculty meetings, general faculty meetings. And then I have a limited number of time in there that I'd like to put about 6 or 7 hours to writing if I can, because that's the key thing as we talked about. And then the rest hours are flexible. But I have a calendar, I have a to-do list of the things I need to get through each day, including projects. If I need some writing time, I book it in. If I need to get to someone's paper this week, I'll book 2 or 3 hours off on my calendar, and I'm reluctant to book something over it because I then know I'm screwing myself for that goal. And so then like meetings that aren't urgent get pushed off. And also nice because I have a daily to-do list with deadlines. If I remember I need to do something, but it's not for 4 months, I put it on my to-do list for 4 months from now. If I have something I'm going to need to do every month, I set a monthly reminder. If I have something I want to do once every year, I have an annual reminder that pops up on my to-do list. And so it also is really nice for those kind of recurring reminders of things. There's all kinds of software tools for this, but figure it out now if you haven't, because it's only going to get harder. Other thing is, oops, I don't know what's trying. I was going to move this out of the way. Picture, I don't know, got messed up. Avoid procrastination and find tools for it, because you can easily get distracted and overwhelmed with things, especially this was the social media conversation we had. I have things like the self-control app, which takes over my computer and will let me go to certain websites or social media for chunks of hours. And when I really need to get something done, I turn it on. So if you get too distracted, get apps that will help you focus. Some people use the Pomodoro method, which I haven't used. I always keep saying I'm going to use it, but I think I'm sufficiently productive without it. I can be disciplined. Other thing is like think of times in terms of resource management. So this was something that was a big issue for me when I used to do a lot more neuroscience as a grad student and postdoc. I try to find times of the year that were optimal. When we had to run behavioral studies in the lab, I would run them in the fall and winter when the subject pool was hot and there's a lot of participants. So the ideal time is September, October, or February to get my behavioral studies done. And then I would plan my neural like MRI studies over the summer when there wasn't a behavioral subject pool. I'd pay people. And I could bring them one at a time to the scan center and I'd have more time. I also planned a lot of like planning, analysis, writing in the summer. And so also part of being efficient is finding out not just the rhythms in the day or the week that work for you, but the rhythms in the seasons that work for you. A lot of academics do like more of their writing in the summer. That might work for you, might not. I prefer now more of like a kind of a weekly schedule. But figure that out. Figure out what is optimal for you season-wise for your research. And then also create a workflow. Like this for me is secondhand, have a workflow of how I work on a paper. But people who work with me know, like, especially writing a review paper, we all get together in one meeting for an hour. We outline the paper, we all brainstorm, we outline it. Then we break up who's going to draft each section. Then we go away, each person drafts each section. We have a deadline to submit your section. And then usually we'll meet again when it's all together to go over, make sure it all makes sense and flows. And then we'll all pick a day in the next week where we all take a turn editing it. And we can write like review papers in a month, whole papers from scratch, because we have a really good workflow and the papers end up being really good. And so we found ways to optimize our efficiency around writing. We also use Google Docs a lot, right? You can work in parallel on those things. So we have a workflow that makes our writing super efficient, which is another reason I think our labs got really productive. You can also have research pipelines, which I had in my lab manual to try to make it more efficient. We have templates. We used to do software for I had templates for analysis scripts. We have checklists about authorship order. We have policies about authorship order. We try to figure that out early. Authorship order is good not just for ethics and fairness, especially with early career people about what their role is, And so they get responsibility to get credit, but also so people can figure out who's doing what. Just provide certainty and clarity and efficiency in projects. So have that as baked as part of your pipeline. You can have these little checklists to make sure everything's going smooth. As you can see here, our top part of our checklist is determining authorship order. We have a link to an APA paper that if there's disputes determines authorship. And so we very rarely have disputes, and if we do, we have a way of solving them. We put things on OSF for open science. We have all of these things to make sure it's all there. We often pre-register our analyses now. And so we have all of this, if we can, checklisted, or at least I try to get people to checklist it. We have checklists for research workflow. That includes like tips for how to generate hypotheses, do lit reviews, determine sample size. We have a writing checklist, like these are the things that you should put in your paper when you're writing it. This is really nice when people are writing, because when they send me a draft, it almost has all this stuff, and I don't have to waste my time telling them to do all this stuff. I can actually focus on the paper. So it means that our writing and revisions will get quicker. I'll be able to do better revisions for them, and I'll get them faster if I'm not stuck doing this stuff. So this is something I think that like makes your work much faster and more efficient. I wish this stupid thing wasn't drawn in here. You know how to get rid of it, you say?
Yeah.
I also think of your investments in skills, not just time management skills, but other skills like analysis. I have like SPSS and SAS syntax, but now a lot of it's like R and Python. Or having like an EndNote library. You can use like Mendeley, or there's all kinds of different software packages. You can use Otero, I think, is what we use now. Have these skills in these platforms and software packages. And I like to think of the payoff very similar to like investments that you make monetarily. That if you start investing in your retirement at age 25, even a small amount each month, over time you get what's called compounding interest, and the value increases dramatically. Whereas if you didn't start investing until you're 35, even if you invest in the same amount, you can see it doesn't, by the time you retire, it's like less than half as much. And so just investing earlier, you accrue these compound interests over time. So invest in these types of skills and time management platforms will pay off incrementally over the long run. So that's something to think about. It's something I think about all the time. As I said, the big one is writing, because I think that's the thing that counts. You know, you do a lot of stuff. The other stuff is all necessary but not sufficient. And so you don't get any credit for all the other stuff you did until you write it up. So you really need to write. That's the key variable, because if you do everything amazing but not that, you will struggle. You will fail at this. Whereas if you do everything okay and you can write well, it can make up for a lot of things. So I recommend writing every day if you can. Like I said, I don't just wait. I used to wait for like one big week to write or a big day open to write. But then if you get writer's block, you're screwed. So now I can try to write for about an hour or two every day I can, or at least a couple of days a week with Windows. And I can write anywhere. I write in airports, I write on airplanes, I write in my office, I write at home. So I can open something and get going right away and edit it. And that's a skill too. Not having to have everything be perfect for you to get some writing done. If you're stuck on something, the best thing is to open it and just start writing. And you'll find eventually you usually get in a flow. But if you just don't open it because you're procrastinating, it will never get done. That's why getting in the habit of writing a little bit every day is key. Because once you just open it and start editing it or writing, then you'll get past those writer's blocks or hurdles. But if you just wait for a big chunk and you're stuck, then you're screwed. I often don't worry about writing well, because I tend to think editing is how you write well, and almost every skilled professional writer will tell you that. And so I just try to write and get stuff on paper the first time, right? Stream of consciousness, and then I edit. And every paper I write is with co-authors, and they edit my writing and make it better, and I edit theirs. And so I tend to edit right up until the moment the paper is accepted. In fact, often the paper we submit is not that great, but by the time we get revisions and we make those and we make additional edits that we thought about upon seeing the paper and having more time to reflect on it, usually the paper is really good by then. So I don't even think like the initial submission has to be perfect by any means. It almost, in my view, it's never, almost never is. And so I'll even edit the paper after the R&R and make changes that the reviewers didn't recommend because I'm trying to improve the paper. My goal is always just to write and make the paper and edit it, make it better and better. And so I think of it always just as a continual process. So I think clear writing is one of your best skills. I've taken writing workshops. A lot of my students take writing workshops. I highly recommend it. I wrote here clear writing is one of the most useful skills. I would say it's the most useful skill because it affects even the emails you write to colleagues. It affects your communications with your students. It affects your communication with your mentors, your collaborators, as well as your papers. So here, Stephen Pinker wrote this great like tips for great writing. There's other people who've written great tips. Whatever you're into, find tips. And Strunk and White is another one. Now you can do AI. You can give your writing to chatbot, and it will give you feedback. You can ask it for specific feedback if you want, like Hemingway-esque writing tips. It will give you those. Whatever you're into, you can ask it for, and it will give you. So I also recommend like getting efficient at writing. So I have a lab writing group, and I used to have a faculty writing group, and we all read this book, How to Write a Lot. And the reason for that is because this book describes not only why it's important to write a lot, but gives you concrete skills like create a writing group. So if you're struggling to get writing done, find 4 or 5 people at your career stage, have a bi-weekly meeting where you meet for coffee or lunch or monthly meeting. You set your writing goals and you go over them and you hold each other accountable and you support each other. So I think like that's something that is really important. That was a huge help to me. Reading this book was one of the best things for my career. I read it my first semester as a faculty member and it just was a game changer. So buy How to Write a Lot and read it and take its advice. Other thing I've learned, and this was from Jennifer Tackett, she always would every year post on social media on Facebook that she would write a paper in a day. She'd show pictures of her and her students like meeting at a cafe and all smiling or having snacks. And I was like, what's this paper in a day? And we found that I've done this many times. But you find it works great in the summer once you have a whole day free, if you don't have in the semester. If you have a paper where all the analyses are due, and sometimes it's just dragging out because you send it one person sits on their desk for 3 weeks, and another person sits on their desk for 2 weeks, and another person for 3.5 weeks. And it's just going really slow. If you can get all people in one room for 6 to 8 hours, and you all have your computers open, you're all working on it, you can all finish it off often in a day. You know, you can't really do this until you probably have the analyses done. And you can troubleshoot, brainstorm. It turns out to be really good for thinking through ideas together because you're all in the room to discuss them. If something comes up, it's more collaborative, it's more fun. So I've done this with several papers, especially ones that are kind of stalled. This is the ultimate way to kind of like close the deal on a stalled paper. So something I highly recommend, worth trying. I didn't really believe it until I did it. I've done it for like 4 or 5 papers. When you're writing, you also want to think of like how to make your writing matter. So one way is to write well. Another way to make your writing matter is write for outlets where people will read it. So we all understand this with high impact journals, right? Like if you write a high impact journal, it's prestigious, but the main reason you write for high impact journals is because impact is almost perfectly correlated with readership. It's the reason that Science and Nature are cited a lot is because they have like 100,000 subscribers, you know, and Psych Science is cited a good amount because it probably has like 5,000 subscribers. And so as you go down kind of the hierarchy, the subscriber numbers are fewer and fewer and fewer people to see it or read it. The worst thing you can do is write a book chapter because almost no one reads them or cites them. This was Dorothy Bishop. She actually had published like hundreds of papers and she analyzed all of them for their impact and citations. And she found that if you look at book chapters, they were almost not cited at all. Whereas her review papers in journals and empirical papers in journals were cited a ton. And there was obviously some exceptions. You always have a couple of papers that aren't cited that much. And occasionally, if you're lucky, you have a chapter that's cited a lot. But just look at the means and confidence intervals. So I would highly minimize writing for chapters. I wrote my last chapter, published it recently. The only reason I did the last couple ones was because I already had a paper written. It was just sitting in the file drawer and it was going to die. Got asked to do a chapter, so I said, "Can I just like send this thing in?" So that way, we could get it out and people would get credit for it. But other than that, I'll never ever write a book chapter, and I haven't written a book chapter from scratch in like 6 years or something like that. So highly recommend avoiding it with that possible exception that you already have written something and it probably won't get published in a journal. And so it will guarantee get published in an edited volume. But other than that, it's someone wasting your time asking you to write a chapter. Also, don't ask other people to write chapters. Don't do an edited volume where you're the editor and you have to ask 20 people to do this, and then you have to badger them relentlessly. There might be some exceptions if it's an extremely prestigious edited volume, and some edited volumes are in that category where they're highly impactful. So we're writing a paper for Annual Review of Psychology. I think it comes out as an edited volume, but the impact's like 20. So it's the highest impact journal essentially in psychology. So that it would be an exception, but most of them are obscure edited volumes that don't get cited at all. And so the main reason people write is because a friend of theirs or someone prestigious asked them, but it doesn't really help you at all. It's much better to write something, do a good job, have it published somewhere where you get credit for it and people will read it. So anyways, that's my thoughts on that. That's all I got to say about that. Early in your career, how many people have a Google Scholar profile? Everybody? Okay. If you don't, you should. The moment you have a publication, you should have a Google Scholar profile. When I see early career people give talks at conferences, I'll click on their Google Scholar profile. I'll see, oh, they're interesting. They're doing, and I can immediately see what other work they published, how much has been cited. I can click on the papers. Their preprints show up here. It's just a really nice piece of technology that automatically updates new publishings. You could go on and you should go on and like check it, make sure it doesn't get the wrong person, similar names, papers on and stuff. You can make sure the citations are correct and so forth. But it's used all the time now. People pull it up. I end up like doing like tenure cases where I pull up the Google Scholar profile and see how much they published, how much has been cited, what are the most impactful papers, what's their H index. All of it's right there. I go to see what people in my area or people I respect are doing, and I'll do a search to see by year to see what they're doing most recently. See what's kind of coming out down the pipeline of their lab that I haven't seen yet. So it serves all these functions. It can link directly to your website. So make a Google Scholar profile and then have a website that it connects to that has all your writings, has your CV, keep it updated, keep it nice, have a professional photo, have a little blurb about yourself. Make it easy for people to find you and find your work. If you are making it hard for them to find you and find your work, you are shooting yourself in the foot. Make it really easy for people to find you and find your work. And if they do a Google search for your name, your website and this will come up right at the top. Like there's no excuses for this. Stuff takes like 5-10 minutes to build. And a website now probably takes like 30 minutes. You can get an AI to build it for you or get a template. So it takes almost nothing and it has huge impact with people, your kind of profile field. So do that. Occasionally see like threads like this about how to build good websites. They're always good advice. Other thing I do on my CV, again, the goal here is to make your work easy to find. If you go to my CV, I have all my in-press papers, and always I will have a hyperlink to the actual paper on the journal website ideally, but also to the preprint. And that way everybody can just go to my CV. If they're scrolling through it, they see a paper that sounds cool, they can click to get to the paper. They don't have to like go open their internet, do a Google search. Hopefully the thing that comes up is actually a link that is to a usable form of the paper that they can actually read. Don't do that to people. You're just making it so much harder for them to find your work. Like, why are you doing that to them? If you want them to read your work, which presumably you do, remember the tree in the forest falling and no one hears it. If it's not published, no one hears it, but if no one reads it, it also has very little effect. So you want to make it as easy for them to find and read. Like reduce the friction is what they say in the behavioral science literature. Reduce the sludge. Okay. So another way to make your work easy to find is to disseminate it. So I think presenting lots is the key way to do it. I've already told you what a waste it is to do posters. So give a talk, give a damn talk. There's lots of conferences, submit to all of them. If you have talks at universities, if you have friends there, especially if you're a postdoc or whatever, occasionally I'll get asked to give talks that I can't give, so I recommend my students, my postdocs. Sometimes it's a former lab member who's now a professor and they're looking for someone to talk to in my lab. It builds your speaking skills, it networks you, it gets your research out. Organize a symposium at a conference if you can't submit a talk. it takes as much as 4 emails to prominent people in the field. It gets you on their radar. They're grateful that you invited them. It takes almost no effort, and you're already networking and building a symposium where you get to give a talk, and then you get to kind of get profiled with all these great scholars in your area. So do all this. This is like so easy to do. Takes like 30 minutes, and it like massively increases the impact of your work. Rather than a poster, which takes 3 days to put together and 5 people see it. So think about these things. Think about like where you can really have an impact, how you can disseminate your work. And I would say talks at conferences. Obviously, social media now is really great, which I'll get to in a second. But if you're going to give a talk, become good at giving a talk. This is a skill. Beyond writing, this is probably the second most important skill you can have, especially early in your career. You will get invited to give our talks if you give good talks. You will build a reputation. People will remember your research if you can give it in the form of a good talk. You don't know how to give a good talk? Watch a bunch of scientists give TED Talks. Those are, sometimes they present shitty stuff, I know, but almost always they're a great speaker and they know how to give a great talk. And so look at their speaking style. Look at the way they can combine it with some evidence with a story and a narrative. Look how elegant their slides are. They're not covered with text. When you give a lot of talks, it's also great because you go to a lot of places, you'll get feedback. And that will help you hone your thinking and design new studies, and your research gets better. So you start crowdsourcing input. Also helps you build a job talk. I gave a talk a lot of places and edited it each time. They got better each time. By the time I gave a job talk, it was super tight. And I was comfortable giving it. And I had been ready for the top 10 most devastating questions because I give it to other places and heard them, and either run studies to address them or had slides at the back end that spoke to them, or was ready on my toes to give a good answer. So you get to kind of rehearse and revise and resubmit your answer to those questions. And so when you give it as a job talk, it will get better and better. Of course, key here is communicate an idea. You know, dissemination is not that great if you really don't have anything to say. Some people want to give talks, but they don't have really solid data or theoretical innovation or contribution. So think a lot about like what you can say. I often don't encourage my students to give a talk at a conference until they have 2 or 3 solid studies. And so you want them to give a talk when it's going to be impressive. You don't want them to give a talk when they're kind of like speaking empty words. So work on building your research to an extent that it is worthy of a talk. I also think, and this is something I've been talking about in my lab for about 10 years, is think about new ways to disseminate. There's like social networks, blogs, all of these things are ways to share, you know, preprints. I try to think about and harness all this to disseminate. You know, so you can figure out ways to get your preprints or your papers up on places where people see on. You can use social media. Now there's TikTok. So you can do a video summary. Check out Steve's TikTok for that. And he just had Claire on like a couple days ago talking about her paper. How many people saw that video?
6,000 or something.
Okay, so 6,000 people saw that. How many people saw your last talk at a conference?
Not that many. I'm trying to remember that.
Maybe 60, if it was good. Last poster, maybe 6.
Yeah.
So obviously it's for your career, it's better if academics see it. But this is just to say there's ways to get it out to different and bigger audiences and be creative, and more academics are on these platforms. So that's something to think about. I always say this though too. I think this is something I see people go a little too far. I can see some people who like on Twitter, like academics who feel like they're just trying to gain the attention economy at this point. They're just talking to fill air and grow followers, and often they don't have anything to say. And they're just spouting hot takes on stuff that they don't know anything about. I would be careful about that. If you're using it for professional purposes, I know like other academics don't really respect that as much. They might think you're cool or fun, and that counts for something too. But if you're saying things that are kind of unhinged or disconnected from evidence, then that could be a double-edged sword. It can grow a following, because that sometimes is what works on social media, but it can undercut your professional credibility. And so think carefully about how you're going to present yourself. Like some people create 2 accounts, one, or some people have like their Facebook account for their personal friends and their personal opinions, and maybe like a public account on Twitter for academic things or on LinkedIn. So also think about how you have different accounts on different platforms for different parts of your identity. And you make that decision, but just be mindful that there's downsides and trade-offs, and I see them all the time in the way people talk about these things. And then this is not just academia. Pretty much every company does social media searches now of job applicants. In fact, way more, I think, than academia does. Some of there's like formalized softwares and stuff. They scrape your social media and see what you post to see if you're going to be a professional liability. And so that is something, and this happens sometimes if people do something controversial, people start tagging their employer to get them fired. So just be mindful that that is now the world we live in, and there's consequences to things. And maybe you're happy to live with those consequences, but also I would say be mindful of this. The way social media works is you say something 10 years from now, someone might take it out of context and hold it against you in some professional opportunity, because that is what happens also all the time. So even though it might have made sense in context right now, might have been relevant to a particular issue, you might have been speaking to a small audience, your audience grows, norms change. 10 years from now, someone digs it up because they're vetting you for something or have a bone to pick with you or do an automated search. And so be mindful of that. Try to say things that you'd be comfortable with 5 or 10 years from now, I would say. Or you can delete messages. I delete stuff all the time. I say something and then after a few hours, like, that might not age well. Even if I stand by it now. Okay. This is kind of the joke of like taking it too far. It's all very well making discoveries, saving lives, improving the world, Roger, but your research is making barely any impact on social media. So this is called, there's a term for this called the Kardashian index, someone created, where it's a ratio of like your social media followers to your actual citations. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek paper, but it's kind of pointing out that you could be gaming one thing, but not gaming the other. And so you it is useful to be mindful of how to navigate this. I actually think this is a little bit silly. I think what matters more is the content of what you share. Anyways, and I'll say this: there's trade-offs. I have a lot of social media followers. I know some of my colleagues are jealous or think it's a waste of time or disparage it. I know other people who are really respect it and think I share high quality stuff. So there's trade-off that I eventually found, like a comfort zone for myself that I live with. But you have to find yours. We also have an article I wrote this with Neil Lewis, Leah Somerville, and June Cooper. Kind of gets you thinking about how to navigate social media effectively. As you know, I hate posters. I say instead of writing a poster, why not write a blog? There's all these places you can write for, like the SPSP blog, you can write for Scientific American blog. For a while, the New York Magazine had a blog. Jamil Zaki started this People Science blog. There's all these great places to write for now. That if you want to get your work out, there's great places that will attract hundreds of people to read your stuff. Actually, that's how I learned Steve. You wrote a blog for Site Today, and you tagged me on Twitter, and I didn't know you. And I read it, and you had cited one of my papers, and it was really good. And then I shared it and said, I think you should read this. And then maybe a year later, you contacted me about coming to visit my lab, and I remembered you from how well you had written a science blog. So that is an interesting way to get known. I also think that's how I met Neil Lewis. I think he posted some like high quality scientific stuff on Twitter. Then he emailed me out of the blue. Then I started following him. Then he emailed me out of the blue to do a workshop for underrepresented minority students. And I said, sure, because I liked what he posted and thought he was smart. And then I invited him to be part of that column for science. And so that's kind of like you can get known by these things that can lead to other opportunities. Okay, try diligently to obtain funding. This is a big part of science. It will make your life easier. If you get funding, you can buy out courses. You can don't have to TA as much. Of course, you can TA in addition if you still want the extra money, in which case maybe take stress off other parts of your life, which is good. So in any event, money helps. It also gives you funding to do research and ideally do better research, more ambitious research. So I spent my whole first year in grad school trying to be competitive for a graduate fellowship in my second year, which I ended up getting. And then I didn't have to TA as much. And it freed me up actually to go to Ohio State for several years when my advisor got poached. If I didn't have that funding, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So that changed the trajectory of my whole career, getting that funding. So that's why I say be as aggressive about getting funding. Also, like academia, there's not a lot of money. You get paid less than, well, you make as much or more than if you're in government or nonprofits, but you get paid a lot less than if you're in like finance or tech. And research funding is scarce, not only for our salaries, but for our projects. And so becoming good and assertive about getting funding can really be a game changer for you. Because there is money if you're willing to go out there and get it and hustle and learn how to write grants and send a lot out and be ready to get rejected a lot. You can do all kinds of really cool research, which is what's happened in our lab. We got better and better and more assertive at getting grants and writing grant applications. And our research has gotten better and better and better. And so the two things are definitely linked. So these things matter, or you can get a lab like a lab manager like Ife is funded off a grant. Suddenly my life gets way easier with Ife around, including like getting rid of the dumb diagrams I draw in my talks. But doing all kinds of things, your research, your lab, your projects get better. I also think of use when you're early in your career courses, treat them as a means, not an end. So I'll say I had some students and some other students in my graduate program who were really smart, but kind of had an undergrad mentality to their courses. They just wanted to get the best grades they could on all their courses, which was great. What I tried to do with my courses was I tried to use them to advance my research. So I wrote papers for my term paper were things I was going to try to publish or were studies I was going to run, where some other people just would write them on whatever came to their mind they thought would get them a good mark. And so I ended up like using them to work through and think through stuff that helped my research. And so it became way more efficient. But I also, when I was done with my courses for credit, I audited 4 or 5 courses just out of interest. I was taking courses on computational modeling and all these other skills I wanted to like learn, and multi-level modeling and things like that, to just become a better scientist. So I took courses as a way to learn in grad school, not as a way to get my marks up, because your marks don't matter that much. I, as a postdoc, sat in classes. I also learned this from my advisor, Will. He was a faculty member sitting in classes, and I would sit in some of the classes with him, and he'd be there sitting in a class from another faculty member who was junior to him, but has skill set he wanted to learn. And so there's no other faculty I've ever seen sit in a class, especially with like advanced skills like that. It took a lot of humility, I thought. But he just was intrinsically motivated to learn things. And so the other thing you can do is build relationships and build a good reputation with faculty. You teach them, they get to know you through your writing and work in a class. Good marks can help you, at least in Canada, it helped me get my fellowship. But I really think that like using it to like think deeply is the main reason you want to do it. Rather than just trying to like optimize your grade. Okay. Sorry, was there a question from somebody? Let's take a break there. Pause, see if there's any questions before we go into the relationship section. Okay, I'll go through this. We're going to do a navigating the job market on another day because I just realized we're not going to get to it. Okay, so the next thing, yeah.
Sorry, can I quickly ask how long the meeting is? Just because I was.
Oh, we're 18 more minutes.
Okay.
So it's an hour and a half, 10 to 11:30. So we'll do another one on navigating job market and post stuff. Okay, so next section is relationships. Relationships are important. I think managing your relationships is yet another kind of basic skill in any job. Okay, so a lot of times I want to keep on this going. Being good at email, being good at managing your time, being good at writing, being good at presenting, managing relations. Those are skills no matter what your job is for the rest of your life. These are like pretty fundamental to any career path. They're particularly important in science because a lot of what we do is collaborative. To go to conferences, as many as you can. There's a lot in New York that are free, you should go to. Go to as many talks as you can, ask questions of speakers. I went to every single lunch with a guest speaker that I possibly could as a grad student. In fact, I got chastised for going to too many. I see students that don't go to any lunches with speakers and it boggles my mind. Because that's like your core opportunity for free networking. It's often funded meal and free networking. And then when you go to conferences later, people know you. Like I knew by the time I'd come to NYU, when I applied to NYU and had interviewed here, I knew at least 3 of the faculty from meeting them at lunches at places they come spoken at. I knew John Jost, David Modio, and Yakov Tropy from them having given talks and met for lunch. By the time I applied, they knew my name, they knew who I was. They had good relationships with me because I was familiar to them by the time I interviewed here. So those things matter a lot. I remember one thing my advisor told me is you want it to be the point when you apply for a top job that when they see your materials, they go, oh, Jay applied. What's he up to? You don't want it to be the point where the case where you're just another random name in a pile of 150 applicants. Like that will happen to you most of the time. But it helps a lot if they know your name and they like either your work or you as a person because you've met them or they've read your work from all the dissemination things I just explained. People, these are people also that I networked. I didn't also network up like that. I did it naturally through these lunches. People say, well, you should go to conferences, just email a bunch of prominent people or whatever, try some meetings. Like you can do that. That's sometimes a little bit hard because the prominent people get like a million emails like that and are super busy. But you get to do it at your home institution nonstop all the time. Go to every talk, come up if you have a question, talk to the person after. If there's an open lunch, go. If there's a morning meeting, that's why I created a morning meeting, go to it. Do all these things and you will be networked. You don't have to do all this other stuff that actually is like feels a bit schmarmy and social networky. Do it organically through these mechanisms that are very normal. And so you don't have to think of it as social networking. It's just you're being an engaged person in your community. So that's how I recommend doing it. And do it laterally too. Meet people at your own career stage. Like I went to a summer school, go apply for the summer camp. I went to summer school of social neuroscience. I met 75 other PhD students and postdocs. And I networked laterally. And then by the time we hit the market, all of them were hitting the job market. And now I have friends at like all the top universities in the world who were my friends from that program. And we send each other students, we send each other postdocs, we invite each other to conferences, we're collaborating with each other on papers, we write grants with each other. And so all of that was not me trying to like network up. It was just me going to an event and being friendly and meeting people. And then those people, as they rose to positions of status and authority, already had a good relationship with me and I could call them up about stuff and they could call me up. And so that was like, there's ways to network that don't have like this slimy, like, hi, I'm so-and-so, have you heard of me? Which is kind of how people think of it. And when they approach it that way, it feels weird. It feels a little bit weird to me sometimes as a faculty member when random students come up to me and just like, they just want me to get to know who they are. But if they come up and they have a question or I'm visiting university and they meet me for lunch, we have an organic conversation, I'll remember who they are. And in fact, I knew Madalena when she applied for a job because, well, when she actually applied to do a postdoc with me, but I'd already known because I had read one of her papers and met her at a conference in Princeton when I was there. And same with Ashwini. I met Ashwini when I gave a talk at University of Texas, Austin, that she was at the lunch. And so when she applied for a job or when we were considering her for a job, I already knew her. And so these are like little things of these people, these are students going to local conferences, going to meet local speakers for lunch and having a bit of a sense of familiarity and relationship with them. And so you can do this, you should be doing this all the time because you don't know where you might apply for a job or where they might be at the time you apply, or it might not be a job, it might be for a postdoc, it might be for an editorial job, it might be for a review. So this is how you do it. I collaborate on everything, people in my lab know that. It's not just that I have this slide forever, but now I have these projects. Paper last year came out 255 co-authors. How many people on our current paper? 496 co-authors, Steve, on our social media project?
Yeah, it's between 500 and 600.
Okay, so now we have a project of about 500 plus authors. So, which is terrifying, which is why Steve's not too happy about it. We're kind of hoping for like 100 to 200. We overshot. So thinking about how to manage collaborative relationship, really important. And being a good collaborator and a good colleague is really important. Underrated. But it's not just something that I find fun. It is something that's relevant to producing high impact science. So this was a great analysis in 2007. Finding that collaboration increases the quality and impact of your research. Even over and above the number of authors, papers are cited more, even if after you adjust for number of authors. The more authors, the higher the impact of the work in general. And it's often more fun and interesting. It's often the real big breakthroughs in science, and pretty much every science, whether you're talking about genetics, particle physics, or psychology now, are large collaborations. And so think of this as an opportunity and also probably as the future. I think I mentioned this last But I love this quote. This is from a lunch with the speaker who was passing through Iowa State with John Petsiopa, who was one of my heroes. And he talked to us about collaboration, and he just said, I have a policy. I only collaborate with people I like. And I love that policy. And I collaborate with people I don't know. But if I find that they're intolerable, or I had some people who wanted me to be a part of a grant, I would have done a lot of money. It would have taken very little work. They were in a different department, different school at NYU. And they were, the main team leader was really insufferable and aggressive. And I just said, no, I'm off. Even though I'd already helped put the grant together. And the other people in the team bagged me. And I said, no, I don't work with toxic personalities anymore. I'm just out. And so you can do that and you'll find, and I remember thinking, well, I need this extra grant. I was told I need more grants to go up for promotion to fall. And in the end, I didn't need it, and it didn't matter. My mental health was severely improved because I got off that project pretty early. And if we had gotten the grant, I'd still be working with that guy for 4 more years, at least, right? And so if you sense that type of personality, man, if you can get out of there, find another collaborator. It becomes admittedly easier once you're in a position of power to do that, I understand. But to the extent that you can build collaborators and deeper collaborations with people you like. And some of my collaborators, like I have a book with Dominic Packer that came out. I met Dominic when I interviewed for grad school. We had an office together in grad school. And so I knew, we've been collaborating for probably 20 years continuously. And I still was texting him last night about something that I was reading, or he sent me an article. And so we're, if you have a good friend that you hit it off with, that's smart, you can collaborate for a long, long, long time. And this is also important with advisors, in case you're not aware, having an advisor that you get along with. And again, I was texting my grad advisor this morning. He texted me about 6 a.m. I texted him back at like 7 a.m. when I woke up. And just about like life stuff, career stuff. And so if you have an advisor that you trust, that goes a long way. It can be a lifelong support for you in your career. They know more than you when you're getting started, although their knowledge is not perfect. And often some of your advisors' knowledge might be outdated, but they often still know a lot more, at least about how the system works. They're often privy to information you might not know, maybe about like what searches are looking for. Sometimes people are contacting them, asking for certain people for certain jobs. They have a sense sometimes of what journals look for and grants. My postdoc advisor was not very involved in papers. He was traveling a lot, I barely ever saw him. But once we got to the R&R stage of a paper, he was super, super involved and always helped us close a deal because he kind of knew how to navigate that last stage better than me and the other student in this lab. And so he ended up being, really helpful for that key part of it. So it's like try to find out what your advisor's strengths are and leverage those and work around their weaknesses. Find someone else who can help you with things they're not strong at. They're usually working in your best interests, not always. Sometimes they're working in their own self-interest. But they're usually working in best interest, or at minimum, what I try to do is align my interests with my students. And that way it's a win. I try to always set up win-wins for both of us. And that often was what predicts the best cooperation. I remember my very first advisor for my master's thesis, Ken Dion. The very first time I met him to start working with him, he shook my hand and he said, from now on, my success is your success and your success is my success. I was like, that was a great thing. And what he meant is, if he goes and wins an award or wins a keynote, then I benefit from a more prestigious advisor with the reputation and contacts. If I give a good talk or do something, get a paper, it makes him look good as a mentor. And so there is a synergistic relationship that you mutually benefit from. Of course, I want to say that there are some terrible mentors and advisors. One of the single biggest predictor of grad student happiness and success is your advisor. That's what the data says. So if you hate your advisor, they might be a great person and you just don't get along with them, or you just don't have similar interests, or they might be a bad person. Like all of those are possibilities, but if it's not going well, try to find another mentor who can support you. Either switch to their lab as soon as you can, or at least have a secondary mentor. And that's one thing we do here. Everybody's expected to have 2 mentors. So ideally you can find a way to succeed with them, but just I do want to acknowledge that is a significant barrier for many, many early career people, because your mentor doesn't have a lot of power over you. And if they're not working in your best interest, And sometimes if they're working against your best interest, that can be terrible. Some of them, are belittling their students and things like that, or pressuring students to do fraudulent data practices. All these things are kind of like very wrong. You should, under those circumstances, you should seriously leave. But if you have just like small differences of opinion or conflicts, you should try to see if you can resolve it. And also, you might not have the same interests as your advisor in every project. So try to find the things where your interests overlap to work on, because your advisor will be much more motivated to help you succeed if they're intrinsically interested in the thing you're doing. So again, as an advisor, I try to find win-wins, but as a junior person, you should also be looking for those win-wins. And there's some things you might, like there's projects that I wanted to work on, my advisor didn't. I wrote them in my notebook, I saved them, I became a faculty member, I got to pursue those projects. So don't worry, you'll be able to get to all the things you want if you stick in the field. But one of the ways of building a relationship is you're taking responsibility for finding shared interest here. Like both parties, if you can do that well, you will be more likely to succeed. Just like your advisor will be more likely to succeed if they can do that for you. So that's just a life skill. And again, that applies to any job. If you get a job as a manager for Facebook, you'll be more successful insofar as you can find things that your staff is interested in working on in ways that they're interested in working on, that you're interested in working on, right? Okay. So I think it's important to show initiative at no matter what career stage you are. I think you should approach your research advisor with questions, things you need help on, but also ideas, propose things. Come to them with data if you're working on a project so that they can concretely help you. Come to them with stimuli you've created. Take advantage of those meetings. Be as concrete as you can. Find novel directions to take the research. So just wait for them to come up with everything. Most people want PhD student collaborators, not research assistants. We want people who are generating things, who are coming to us with new ideas. Almost every PhD student I've had has kind of pushed my research in some new interesting direction that I wouldn't have gone in on my own. And it doesn't have to happen right away. First or second year grad students, you're still kind of learning the ropes. But by your fourth or fifth year, you've got skills, you've read a lot more, you can be guiding the research more. And understand that early on, a lot of your research interest is probably going to be your advisor's interest. It might also be because if you're funded on a grant. But over time, that should shift. By the time you're in your fifth or sixth year postdoc, it should be more and more your interests. With the exception if you're doing a postdoc funded off a grant, sometimes you have to actually do the grant work. But these should be conversations around different interests and try to triangulate on something you both like. And that'll be the best, most fruitful relationship. I think as an early career person, you should develop your own thoughts and ideas. And this can come not just by working with your advisor, it can become by writing course papers on things that genuinely interest you. I wrote down all my cool ideas, and then a lot of them I never got to. A lot of them I bounce off my office mates, and they would say that's cool or that's dumb. And then I think through it. Then I'd look in the literature and see if someone had done it or not. If someone had done it, I'd just drop it. So you have to generate a ton of ideas and vet them through all this way. Ask people around you in your lab if it sounds like a good idea. If they convince you it's not, then maybe you can drop it. If they think it's good, then maybe look in the literature, do a deep dive. Has it been done before? Is it kind of a solved problem? Then maybe it's not worth pursuing if it's not that novel or whatever. And if it's novel and your colleagues in your lab think it's good, then maybe take it to your advisor. So that's kind of how I vetted those 3 steps to kind of triangulate on good ideas. I also say take responsibility for your career. I think the best kind of model for students in postdoc is to kind of struggle through the problems as they're facing them. Try to figure out the data analysis, the programming on your own, because struggling through it helps you learn to solve the problem. You don't always want to go to your advisor to solve it. But if you get stuck, then you need to go to your advisor. So don't ever stay stuck. Then go to your advisor or other mentors or people in the lab to help you. And so there's kind of this kind of sweet spot about struggling a little bit, but then reaching out to others. You don't want to struggle always on your own because you'll probably get stuck and you won't be able to evolve. You don't want to go to everybody all the time for everything, and then you're not learning it on your own. You're not learning independence, right? So your whole goal of your PhD and your postdoc is to build your independence so that you can be an independent scientist on your own. And not only that, but if you become a faculty member, you should be independent enough that you can then train the next generation of grad students and postdocs. And I will say this as an assistant professor, I was doing everything with my grad students because I had a first-year grad student and nobody else. And so you got to teach them everything. Once you have a lab, and you have postdocs in it and senior grad students, they end up teaching the junior grad students. It becomes like a culture, self-perpetuating system. But early on, you've got to be able to show your first grad student how to do everything. I was sitting there in that lab, clicking through everything with them. And then mostly with the second student, and then a little bit less with the third, and then a little bit less with the fourth, because they were in suddenly a culture, a community, a lab that could help them. And we started to formalize things and have manuals. But definitely in those first few generations, you're doing that. So you have to be ready to do that. So now is the time to build your independence, so that you can do it. And I also say that, like early in your career, especially grad school, is a safe place to fail. It's okay to struggle through things and fail through things. And there's not really, it might feel like there's pressure, but it's nowhere near as much as when you're an assistant professor and you have your own grad student and they're staring at you, asking you how to analyze some data set and you have no idea what to do. That's terrifying. Because then your other people's careers are hanging on your, and education is hanging on your abilities. So that's the time it's safe, where it's only really you're at risk and you have time and a window. It's also really hard when you're assistant professor because you're building a lab, you're suddenly teaching 2 or 3 courses or more, you're course prepping, suddenly you're attending faculty meetings, you're in leadership roles in the department and service commitments and in the field, you're reviewing and editing, you're writing grants, you're doing all these things on top of it. So you don't have the time often to sit there and figure things out in the same way that you did when you were a grad student. So take advantage of that. Okay, that's 11:30. So I'll let you digest it. Are there any questions? Next time we meet, we're going to be talking about the job market. And since it's for Marriott Brothers, it's fun to have a Marriott Brothers metaphor. But are there any questions about this kind of skills stuff? And like I said, all this is general, I think. Almost all of it is general advice, whether or not you go into academia. I think it's the same thing if you're a manager at a company and you're getting paid 6 figures, they're going to expect you to know shit and teach people and manage a team. And so, you know, building these skills now is a good time to do it, because once you're on the clock and getting paid with actually concrete deliverables, it really matters that you took the time to learn the skills now.